that you can hear me, and I hope that you can see. Okay, very good. As long as we are on a platform, we're all right. What I think I'm going to do, I'm going to go backwards. Instead of telling you about Islamic science influencing Europe, I want to start in Europe, and then I want you to hear echoes of what was happening in Europe. And the title that I is not exactly the title of my book. Here that I chose, the book, by the way, is simply called Islamic Science and the Making of the European Renaissance. In it, I argue that there is a very deep connection between Islamic astronomy and Copernicus. But since then, which was finished, by the way, 2 years ago, I discovered a deeper connection between Islamic astronomy and Galileo. And things are moving forward, so hopefully I will find, that's why the subtitle here, first Copernicus and then Galileo, but you will not find the Galileo material in the book except in a very short footnote. Now, what makes Copernicus a very interesting character for us is that he proposed to shift the center of the world from the Earth and to put it in the sun. That is what Copernicus is known for and all of that stuff. But still, at the same time, he still had to account for how do the planets move around the sun. Do they move by themselves? Are they fish swimming in the sea? Why is the sun there? All of those ideas, he could not simply say, I'd like this center to be moved from here to there. You have to account for the mechanism that moves them. Especially that he doesn't have, at the time when he died in 1543, Kepler died in 1630, so it's about 100 years later that we have these elliptical motions, and even Kepler at the time says there is this something similar to magnetism that holds those planets together so that they can move in this fashion. He didn't have either Newton, that comes also 100 years later in 1627, who says there is such a thing as universal gravitation. Any two bodies, no matter where they are, they hold each other, and hence it is okay to have the sun in the center and it can hold everything together. So in hindsight, it looks like Copernicus was talking way ahead of his time, and he had no proof for what he was doing, and he really needed to account for the movements of the planet. Let us hear it from his own mouth. What are the things that were bothering him at the time? In his earliest work on astronomy that we see here, is called the Commentarioles. I highlighted the sentence that is important for us to worry about. He says, I understand that our predecessors assumed a large number of celestial spheres, principally in order to account for the apparent motion of the planets through uniform motion. That's the most important, crucial thing, for it seemed highly unreasonable that a heavenly body should not always move uniformly in perfect circular form. Never mind ellipses, never mind Kepler. No, see, we are talking much earlier than this, and this is the imagery and the cosmology that he has in mind. Then he goes on to say, nevertheless, the theories concerning these matters that have been put forth far and wide by Ptolemy and most others, although they correspond numerically with apparent motions, to say that you can predict, with the ancient theories, you can predict the positions of the planets. So this is not his concern. His concern is that they seemed quite doubtful. These theories are doubtful, for these theories were inadequate unless they also envisioned certain equant circles. I'll come to say something about this equant, on account of which it appeared that the planet never moves with uniform velocity, either in its deferent sphere or with respect to its proper center. So he's challenging and disregarding all the previous theories, and then therefore a theory of this kind seemed neither perfect enough nor sufficiently in accordance with reason. So this is from the horse's mouth. That's what Copernicus is complaining about. He doesn't, not a word here is said, I don't like it that the Earth is the center. I want to move it. He is worried about moving those spheres that account for the planet's movement in perfect circular orders, and that is, as he puts it himself, this way. This echoes a statement made 400 years earlier by a man called Ibn al-Haytham, known in the Latin West as Al-Haytham, and listen to him, also from his mouth, and this is translation, and in a book that he called Doubts on Greek Astronomy, meaning again he's rejecting Greek astronomy already in the 11th century, and they say, what we have reported is the truth of what Ptolemy, that's the greatest Greek astronomer, had established for the motion of the upper planets, and that is a notion that necessitates a contradiction. So in the 11th century, you have an astronomer telling us that what Ptolemy, the ancient Greeks, were doing necessarily has built-in inner contradictions. Hence, you cannot do science with built-in contradictions into it. Second time he repeats this, he says, this is an absurd impossibility. When he speaks of Greek astronomy, it's an absurd impossibility in direct contradiction with his, meaning Ptolemy's earlier statement about the celestial motions being continuous, uniform, and perpetual. Here again, you have uniform motion. Ptolemy could not account for it, and therefore Ibn al-Haytham is criticizing him, and 400 years later, Copernicus is also criticizing him. Again, he said the truth that leaves no room for doubt is that there are correct configurations for the movements of the planets. That we are not in a hopeless universe. We are in a rational universe. We can account for these, and there is a correct one, which exists, are consistent, and entail none of these impossibilities and contradictions, of course, of the Greek method. But they are different from the ones that were established by Ptolemy, and Ptolemy could not comprehend them, nor could his imagination attain their true nature. So you see the problematic, that it's coming in that angle to attack the Greek material, and then we said 400 years later Copernicus also attacked. What were these guys complaining about? And in effect, that's what they were complaining. If you look at the screen and you see there is a planet which is the little, I think if I move the arrow here, yeah, you see this little planet here is stuck onto a sphere, and this planet is supposed to move on this sphere, and then the whole small sphere is embedded in the shell of this outer sphere. And the Greek tradition tells us, or at least what they are complaining about, is that this outer shell sphere, the light blue sphere, must move in place at uniform speed, that is, stay in its position, move uniformly, but on an axis that is called the equant, which is this axis that you see in here. This is tantamount to say that you can have, as a basketball player, I have your good basketball team player here, who, you know those basketball players, they can spin the ball on their finger? That can only work if their finger is pointing to the center of that sphere. And let me show you what happens when it is not pointing to the center of the sphere. Watch it as it goes. He moves his finger a little bit, the whole universe collapses. So in effect, what the Greek tradition is telling us, that there is a sphere that actually can move and stay up without your finger pointing to the center, and the Islamic tradition, when they translated this, they heard this one said, this is impossible. There is no such sphere. It's mechanically impossible. Hence, we have to look for alternatives. Now, the first person to bring new alternatives is a man by the name of Mu'ayyad al-Din al-Urdi, that you have his date in 1250. He said, in order to fix these things, I need to introduce new mathematics. And hence, the theorem that he has it, you see it here in the page, is a very simple theorem, but you can see the need for new mathematics to account for the higher movements of the planets. Then he says, now that I have established the theorem, I can plug it in and show you how we can make every single sphere, by which he means the outer spheres, the smaller sphere, every single one of them now moves on an axis that goes through the center and still duplicates the movements that we see of the planets around us. Beautiful success. The fact that he was so successful attracted the attention of a Kepler. Kepler noticed that this very same theorem is embedded in the Copernican text. And as a good student, he wrote to his teacher, Maestlin. You see that the name of the professor is up there. Maestlin was his teacher, and he wrote to him, he says, no, Copernicus wrote this and included this in it, but he didn't prove it. There was no proof left. So what is the situation? How can I do it? So it was Maestlin who wrote to Kepler and saying the proof is this, and turns out that he is proving for him again the same theorem that was proposed by Mu'ayyad al-Din al-Urdi in the year before the year 1250. So 300 years have passed. So now you can see that these new mathematical ideas getting embedded within the Copernican text, getting questioned by Kepler, getting responded to by Maestlin, and those are the most important astronomers of the Renaissance. There is nobody else that I can point to, or I challenge anybody to tell me that we know of a better astronomer of the Renaissance than these people. Second thing also, they had inherited from the Greek tradition a concoction on how the moon moves around us. But for reasons that are a little bit technical, I don't need to waste time on them, and the Greek theory tells us that when the moon is around 1 week old, that is when it is half moon, it should be close to the Earth by a distance that you see here is 39 units, while when it is a full moon, it would be at a distance of 60 units. Okay, we all know. Common sense of it is that if I have an object, no matter how big is that object, if I bring it closer, it becomes bigger. No? The proof, put your hand right in front of your eye, it will cover the whole wall behind it. Does that mean that your hand is bigger than the wall? No. It means it's too close. So when you bring an object from 60 units apart to 39 units, which is halfway, then the moon should look twice as big. Isn't that logical? Doesn't that make sense to you? In fact, I drew these things to scale so that you could see the proposition that is done by the Greek text is that the moon at quarter moon should look twice as big as it is when full moon. So a guy in Damascus by the name of Ibn Shatir says, "Lam yura kadhalika." I have never seen the moon get that big when it is a quarter moon. So therefore, I need new mathematics. And what does he do? He proposes a new arrangement so that the moon can actually move and can actually account for all the variations and all of its motion, but still keep the same distance from the Earth. Hence, its visibility, its radius will remain the same. And that is the concoction that Ibn Shatir came up with. And now I want to draw your attention to another character. Down at the bottom you see a character by the name of Copernicus. Just compare them, circle for circle, arc for arc. You see the arrangements are exactly the same. Which means that Copernicus was also convinced that this mathematical solution of Ibn Shatir is an ingenious solution, and hence he adopts it and puts it right into his text. Now, all you have to, you don't have to become astronomers at the end of this evening, but all I want you is to compare visually the ancient Greek text up on your left and the two proposals that followed over there, and see the identity of the two proposals. Just visually, believe me, the mathematics is all worked out and it is in the book and you can read it at your leisure. Then it came to this other text, this other problem of a planet called Mercury. Mercury is a nasty planet because it's very close to the sun, it's very hard to observe, and hence also Copernicus did not know how to do it. So he borrowed also from Ibn Shatir again. This diagram that you see it on the right, the mathematics of it, is taken right out of the text of Ibn Shatir. And when the translator of the work of Copernicus, by the name of Sverdlov, he edited the text of Copernicus and translated it into English. When he reached this one, and now he gives us the citation of what Copernicus speaks about this mathematics. It says simply here, but this combination of circles, although adequate to the other planet, is not adequate to Mercury, because when the Earth is in the views of the apses mentioned, the planet appears here to move, traversing a far smaller circumference. On the other hand, when it is at quadrature, it reaches maximum. In other words, Copernicus was fascinated by the size here of the orbit, that he thinks that this is the largest, and he's comparing it with the smallest that you see it here at the very top. Now Sverdlov catches him here, he says. Here again, the size of the object is not independent. It is always what is the size and how far is it from my eye. He didn't notice that the relatively smaller orbit that you see it here, and at angle 120 degrees from the apogee, this smaller circle surrounded by the blue angle is indeed for the observer here on the Earth larger than the one that is surrounded by the red, because it is it is brought closer to the observer. So now, Sverdlov, when he meets this, he says, Copernicus apparently does not realize that the model was designed not to give Mercury a larger orbit when the Earth and the center epicycle is 90 degrees from the apsis, but to produce the greatest elongation when the Earth is about 120 degrees from the aperture. So now, he catches him and he says, what is the conclusion? He said, the only alternative, he said, therefore, is that he copied it, that Copernicus copied this model. And this is Sverdlov, by the way. It's not me, I didn't invent it. This is published in 1973 in the best journal in this country called the American Philosophical Society Journal. And that Sverdlov concludes this. The only alternative is that he copied it without fully understanding what it was really about. He didn't understand fully how it worked. Since it is of the Shatter's model, we know that this is further evidence, and perhaps the best evidence, that Copernicus was in fact copying without fully understanding from some other source. Now, in other words, you can catch people only in these instances. If two people come to the correct solution at the same time, you can say coincidences and people hit on the correct answer at the same time. But when somebody hits the right answer, the other one copies the right answer, makes mistakes in the explanation of the right answer, then you can say he is definitely indebted to this person before. And that is the conclusion that Sverdlov had reached. Now, another astronomer who was the boss of Mu'ayyad al-Ardi, whom we mentioned first, by the name of Nasiruddin al-Tusi, as you see him over there. What does he say? He was also reviewing the Greek tradition and reviewing it in a book that nobody would read, because again, we are not used to read commentaries on commentaries. When somebody says, I'm writing a commentary on an ancient book, we think that he's just regurgitating the same thing. In the case of Tusi, when he reaches this position, he says, I say this kind of speech does not belong to the craft of astronomy. So he's objecting to the book that he is working on, and then he says, I can solve this problem, and he proposes, again, another mathematical theorem that he puts it on the margin of the text, as you see it over there. This theorem, in effect, 10 years later, in the year 1258, he realized it is a very fecund theorem. It actually solves all sorts of problems, and it is still with us, I think, in the engine of your car. What it does is the following. I can show you exactly how this theorem works. Notice the red dot. It allows the red dot to move up and down along a straight line as a result of the movements of two circular motions. See, he wants to preserve the idea of circular motion that we heard about it at the very beginning. But at the same time, for observational reasons, he needs things to move back and forth. So he says we can concoct this theorem and to put them together and actually do it. So, as you have seen in the previous page, he gives you 4 video shots, and then he proves it mathematically. In the proof, Copernicus needed the same thing. So he also tries to prove the same thing. Except that when you compare the Arabic proof, where there is a letter Aleph here, there is a letter A in the Latin, letter V in Arabic, B in Latin, Jim in Arabic, G in Latin, D Dal in Arabic, D in Latin, A Ha in Arabic, H in Latin. What the heck is going on? This guy is copying the geometric points at the same time. He does not even take the freedom to call those geometric points anything he wants. In other words, if I ask you to draw a triangle ABC, you put ABC wherever you want. Why is he putting them in this if he were not working from a copy? Now, this theorem that we just talked about, as we said, and I will give you one more impression of it, that it oscillates back and forth without stopping. Notice, the circle continues to move, the red point goes up and down and does not stop at the very end. The fact that it did not stop had a whole debate between Plato and Aristotle. You see, we're going back all the way to the ancient Greeks. Plato and Aristotle had a great discussion on whether a movement that goes up and down reaches an instantaneous rest in between. Plato says no, it doesn't need to do so. Aristotle says it's impossible without doing that. Who faces this problem? Galileo, when he comes to actually account for the physical motion. Now he borrows something from astronomy, goes into physics, and he says, in this issue of things when they reverse their motion, Aristotle says that they have to stop. But I have 4 important arguments against it. The third argument, and this is now from Galileo. Now you can see why first Copernicus, then Galileo. The third argument in Galileo says, can be taken from a certain rectilinear motion. That's the linear motion we just saw, that Nicholas Copernicus in his De Revolutionibus compounds from 2 circular motions. So now we can see Galileo leaning on Copernicus to take the theorem out of Copernicus and deploy it now in physics to solve the problem of this instantaneous movement that we have here. So you can see the continuity of a bright idea that occurred first to Nasiruddin al-Tusi, lived and explained problems in the Tusi's work, now goes into Copernicus, explains the same problems, sometimes without understanding them, but now Galileo making full use of this material that's available to him through Copernicus. Galileo was also friends with a man, and I'm very glad we have Giancarlo here, was also friends with a man called Giambattista. As you see here, Giambattista was a Napolitan guy very close to where Giancarlo comes from, and he also wrote a book, and the first edition of it in 1610, as you see it right in here, and the book is simply a book on the nature of air and meteorological problems and things like that nature. But this is a man who was writing in 1610, that is in the very heart of the Renaissance. He felt that his book will add to its value. I wish I had done the same thing, by the way. that he would have to use right next to the first, when you flip the first page, look what you find in it. He commissioned a friend of his by the name of Marco Dobili. Up to this minute, I still don't know who he is, but we can, from his own insignias, he says he is a professor at the in Romano Gymnasio Lingua Arabica Professoris. So this is a guy teaching Arabic at the Roman Gymnasium, which we may have news for you. It may be the very same as the Jesuit Collegio Romano, because they changed their names. So here you have, he borrows the professor from there to write an Arabic poem to make his book more valuable, to be able to sell it. And now, when he became a member of the Accademia dei Lincei, as you see there, the Lincei, now he said Giambattista Porta Lincei. Now he takes great pride when he joined the Accademia dei Lincei, to whom was Galileo also one of the early members. So they both sat in the Accademia dei Lincei, and here again, he also brought over in 1614 the same introduction to that book, to think that it is still a valuable thing to have a poem in Arabic praising his book in Latin. Thank you. I think I finished, and I think I am within my time. No?